On my wedding day, my cruel stepmom ordered me to clean her dirty toilet. When I refused and said I'm picking up my wedding dress from the tailor, she grabbed my arm and snarled, "You ungrateful little brat. You think wearing a fancy dress makes you better than me." In her rage, she yanked me toward the bathroom, causing me to stumble and hit the doorframe. As blood trickled down my forehead, I knew this was the last time she would ever hurt me. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and this is the story of how I turned my stepmom's attempt to destroy my wedding day into her own worst nightmare. If someone had told me 5 years ago that I would end up exposing a web of lies so deep it would shake our entire community, I wouldn't have believed them. But sometimes the greatest victories come from our darkest moments. You see, my stepmom Karen wasn't just cruel, she was calculating. She had spent years carefully crafting her image as the perfect wife and stepmother. To our neighbors, she was the sweet woman who organized community bake sales. To my father's colleagues, she was the charming hostess who threw dinner parties. But behind closed doors, she was a monster who took pleasure in breaking me down, piece by piece. That morning, as I watched my blood drip onto my white blouse, something inside me snapped. Maybe it was the way she smiled when I touched my bleeding forehead. Maybe it was hearing her say, "Now look what you made me do." Or maybe it was simply that after 15 years of abuse, I had finally reached my breaking point. I pulled out my phone and started recording. "Say that again," I challenged her, my voice surprisingly steady. "Tell me again how this is my fault." Karen's face contorted with fury. She lunged for my phone, but years of dodging her attacks had made me quick. What she didn't know was that my fiancé, James, had already set up hidden cameras throughout the house the week before. We knew she would try something on my wedding day, we just didn't know what. "You think you're so clever," she spat, pacing like a caged animal. "You're nothing. You'll always be nothing. Just like your pathetic mother." Those words about my mother were the final straw. But instead of breaking down like I would have in the past, I felt a strange calm wash over me, because at that moment I knew exactly how I would destroy her carefully constructed life of lies. And the best part? She had just given me everything I needed to do it. What happened next would not only change my life but would expose a decade-long conspiracy that had torn apart more families than just mine. This is a story about survival, justice, and the kind of revenge that comes from playing the long game. But most importantly, it's about learning that sometimes the best way to heal isn't just about getting even, it's about getting free. Let me take you back to where it all began. I was 12 when my mom died in a car accident. She was driving home from her night shift at the hospital, where she worked as a nurse. One rainy night, one drunk driver, and just like that, my whole world shattered. I remember the last thing she said to me: "Study hard, sweetheart. Your education is something no one can ever take away from you." She had no idea how important those words would become. My dad didn't handle her death well. He threw himself into work, leaving me mostly alone in our big, empty house. Looking back now, I understand he was drowning in grief. But at 12, all I knew was that I'd lost both parents, one to death and one to sorrow. Then Karen entered our lives. She was the new receptionist at Dad's dental practice, and she seemed like an answer to our prayers. At first, she was perfect cooking dinner, helping me with homework, bringing life back into our home. Dad smiled again for the first time in months. I felt hopeful when they got married just 8 months after they met. That hope lasted exactly 2 weeks after the wedding. It started small. She'd forget to wash my school uniforms, making me wear dirty clothes to class. My lunch money began disappearing from my backpack. When I told Dad, she'd cry and say I was lying to get attention. And Dad, still desperate to hold onto his newfound happiness, believed her. As I got older, things got worse. Karen had a talent for cruelty that was almost artistic. She'd wait until Dad was away on business trips to be at her worst. Once, she locked me out of the house in winter because I got better grades than her real daughter from her first marriage. I sat in the garage for 6 hours, doing homework by flashlight, until Dad came home. "Oh my goodness," she exclaimed when Dad found me shivering. "Sarah, why didn't you just ring the doorbell? I had no idea you were out here." She even managed to squeeze out a few tears. Dad hugged her and comforted her, while I stood there with blue lips and numb fingers. But Karen's biggest mistake was underestimating me. While she was busy playing the perfect wife, I was watching, learning, and documenting everything. Mom's words about education became my shield. I studied hard, got scholarships, and made plans for my escape. That's when I met James. He wasn't like the other guys I dated. When I nervously told him about Karen on our third date, expecting him to run, he instead pulled out a notebook and started taking notes. As a junior detective in the fraud department, he said something felt off about my story, and not on my end. "Financial abuse often goes hand in hand with emotional abuse," he explained. "And from what you're telling me, your dad's practice should be making a lot more money than what's showing up in your household." That was the first time anyone had ever believed me without question. It was also the moment I started to see a way out. James wasn't just my boyfriend, he became my partner in gathering evidence. Every misplaced document, every suspicious bank statement, every accidental injury, we recorded it all. But we had to be patient. Karen was smart, and she had spent years building her web of lies. One wrong move and she'd destroy everything we'd worked for. So we waited, gathering evidence, building our case, and planning for the perfect moment to strike. What we didn't expect was for that moment to come on my wedding day. But then again, Karen always did have a flair for dramatic timing. She just didn't realize she was playing right into our hands. Living under Karen's roof taught me one thing: survival means being smarter, not stronger. While she thought she was breaking me down, I was building myself up. Every insult, every scheme, every manipulation became a lesson in strategy. High school became my sanctuary. While Karen tried to sabotage my studies by accidentally deleting my assignments or making me do endless household chores, I stayed up late studying under my covers with a flashlight. I joined every club I could, not just for college applications, but because every minute at school was a minute away from her. "You're just like your mother," Karen would sneer. Always thinking you're better than everyone else. She meant it as an insult, but I took it as a compliment. My mom had worked her way through nursing school while raising me alone for years before she met my dad. If I was like her, that meant I was strong. Then came the day I got my college acceptance letters. I'd applied in secret, using my teachers' addresses. When I got full scholarships to 3 different universities, Karen's mask slipped in front of my dad for the first time. "She can't go," she screamed, throwing the acceptance letters into the trash. "Who's going to take care of the house? Who's going to help with your practice's paperwork?" That last part made James raise his eyebrows when I told him about it later. Why was Karen so worried about me leaving the practice's paperwork? But I did go to college. I chose State University, close enough to keep an eye on Dad, but far enough to breathe freely. I majored in accounting, Karen's worst nightmare. Numbers don't lie, and I was learning to read them very well. That's where I got to know James. We'd been dating casually, but one night at the library, I found him reviewing my father's practice's public records. "Something's not adding up," he said, spreading out the papers. "Your dad's practice is one of the most successful in the state, but the reported income is surprisingly low." Together, we started piecing things. Karen wasn't just emotionally abusive, she was stealing. As the practice's office manager, she had access to everything. But we needed proof, and that meant playing a long game. I played my part perfectly. On the surface, I was the defeated stepdaughter, home from college on weekends, quietly doing whatever Karen asked. But every time I helped with the office filing, I was gathering evidence. Every time she made me organize her papers, I was taking pictures. James taught me what to look for: fake invoices, duplicate payments, hidden accounts. "Keep playing along," James advised. "The more she thinks she's winning, the more careless she'll get." And he was right. Karen got cocky. She started buying expensive jewelry, going on solo business trips, and living larger than my father's legitimate income could support. She thought nobody was watching, but we were documenting everything. The hardest part was watching my father sink deeper into her control. The once successful dentist now looked tired and worried all the time. He'd ask Karen about the practice's finances, and she'd kiss him and tell him not to worry his handsome head about it. Then she'd look at me with that smug smile that said, "See? I own him." When James proposed, Karen's reaction was exactly what we expected. She was thrilled not for my happiness, but because she thought a wedding would distract me from her schemes. She even offered to handle all the wedding finances herself. "I don't trust this," James said when I told him. "She's planning something big." We set up cameras in the house 2 weeks before the wedding, disguised as new smart home devices. Dad thought they were a gift from me to modernize the house. Karen was too busy going through my wedding budget to notice what they were. The night before my wedding, I heard her on the phone in her study. "Don't worry," she was saying, "after tomorrow's transfer, we'll have enough to disappear. The stupid girl's wedding is the perfect cover." I texted James immediately, "She's making her move tomorrow." His response was quick: "Perfect. Everything's in place. Just be ready." What Karen didn't know was that her big move was exactly what we'd been waiting for. Sometimes the best trap is the one your enemy walks into willingly, thinking it's their idea. Planning a wedding while setting up the biggest sting operation of our lives wasn't easy. Every decision became a chess move in our larger game. Karen, of course, insisted on being involved in every detail exactly as we hoped she would. "Let me handle the money, dear," she said with that fake sweet voice she used when Dad was around. "You don't want to stress about finances before your big day." She even convinced Dad to give her access to his savings account just for the wedding expenses. What she didn't know was that every transaction she made was being tracked. James had set up a system with his colleagues in the fraud department. Every dollar she moved brought us closer to exposing her entire scheme. The wedding venue was her first big move. She booked an expensive country club, then canceled it without telling me, pocketing the deposit. When I discovered the cancellation 2 weeks before the wedding, she put on an Oscar-worthy performance. "Oh, darling," she gasped, fake tears ready. There must have been some terrible mistake. Don't worry, we can have the wedding in our backyard. It'll be so much more intimate. The way she smiled when she said intimate made my skin crawl. But I played my part. I cried, pleaded, and finally accepted the backyard wedding with defeated resignation. Karen was so pleased with herself that she didn't notice James's cousin, a contractor, inspecting our backyard for the perfect spots to place additional cameras. The guest list was another battlefield. Karen kept losing the invitations to my mom's side of the family. Oh, how careless of me, she'd say, finding them weeks later in her desk drawer, too late to mail. She didn't know I'd already sent everyone backup invitations, along with specific instructions for a wedding day. Your mother's relatives are so common, she told me one day while reviewing the RSVPs. Are you sure you want them on your special day? What will James's family think? James's family, as it happened, thought quite a lot. His uncle, a judge, and his aunt, a forensic accountant, were particularly interested in attending. Karen was so busy running her scams that she never bothered to learn what my future in-laws did for a living. The wedding dress shopping was almost the breaking point. Karen insisted on coming along and managed to spill red wine on every dress I tried on. Oops, she'd say, not even trying to hide her smirk. Red wine is so tricky. After the third accident, the boutique owner pulled me aside. Honey, she whispered, I've been doing this for 20 years. That woman is trying to sabotage you. She helped me pick out a backup dress and kept it at the store, telling Karen it was being altered. As the wedding got closer, Karen got bolder. She started moving larger sums of money, thinking the wedding chaos would cover her tracks. Every night, she stayed late at the office, not knowing that James had placed a tiny camera in her desk plant months ago. 1 week before the wedding, we got what we needed. Late at night, Karen was on a video call with someone, planning what looked like a permanent vacation with my father's money. The idiot trusts me completely, she laughed. Once the wedding's over, I'll transfer the last bit, and we can finally drop this act. James and I watched the footage together in his apartment. Are you ready for this? He asked, holding my hand. Once we start, there's no going back. I thought about my mom, about Dad, about all the years of abuse and manipulation. I've been ready for this my whole life, I replied. We spent that final week preparing everything. The cameras were in place, the evidence was organized, and our trap was set. All we needed was for Karen to make her move, and we knew she wouldn't be able to resist trying to ruin my wedding day. The night before the wedding, I lay in bed listening to Karen humming happily in her study, probably counting her stolen money. Enjoy it while you can, I whispered to myself. Tomorrow, you'll learn why you should have never underestimated me. Little did Karen know, but her perfect plan to destroy my wedding day was about to become her own worst nightmare. The morning of my wedding day started exactly as I expected, with Karen's master plan to break me. I was in my room getting ready when she barged in, holding cleaning supplies and wearing that cruel smile I knew too well. The bathroom needs cleaning, she announced, tossing a scrub brush at me. You didn't think you'd get out of your chores just because of your silly little wedding, did you? I looked at my phone. 7:15 a.m. Right on schedule. James and I had predicted she'd make her move early before guests arrived. The hidden camera in my bedroom clock was recording everything. No, I said quietly, putting down my makeup brush. I won't be cleaning any bathrooms today. Karen's eyes narrowed. What did you just say to me? I said no. I stood up straighter, feeling surprisingly calm. I'm done being your servant, Karen. I'm done with your abuse. Her fake sweet demeanor vanished instantly. She stormed across the room and grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. Listen here, you ungrateful little brat. I own this house. I own your father. And until you walk out that door with your precious James, I own you too. I smiled, and that seemed to throw her off balance. You might want to rethink that statement about owning the house, I said softly. It's hard to own anything from prison. For a moment, confusion flickered across her face. Then understanding dawned, followed by pure rage. She lunged for my laptop, where she'd spotted a spreadsheet open on the screen. It was a detailed record of every penny she'd stolen from my father's practice over the years. You little spy, she screamed, grabbing my wedding dress from its hanger. You think you can threaten me? She started ripping at the fabric, but I didn't move to stop her. That wasn't my real dress. The real one was safe at the boutique. Karen, I said calmly, still recording on my phone, would you like to explain these bank transfers? The ones you made to your secret account in the Cayman Islands? She froze. How did you? Or maybe we should talk about the fake invoices? The ghost employees on the payroll? The insurance fraud? With each question, her face grew paler. Did you think I spent all those years helping with office paperwork without noticing anything? That's when she snapped. She grabbed the heavy crystal vase from my dresser, an engagement gift from James's parents, and swung it at my head. I managed to dodge, but it caught my forehead, sending a stream of blood down my face. I'll kill you before I let you ruin everything, she shrieked, raising the vase again. The bedroom door burst open. Dad stood there, his face ashen. Behind him were two police officers and James, all of them having watched everything on the security feed downstairs. "It's over," Karen, James said, his voice firm but professional. "We have everything on camera. The assault just now, the financial records, the phone calls planning your escape, all of it." Dad stepped into the room, looking at the blood on my face, the torn dress, the woman he'd trusted for so many years. "How could you?" he whispered. "All this time." Karen tried to run, but the officers were faster. As they led her away in handcuffs, she was still screaming threats and insults. But for the first time in my life, her words had no power over me. Dad reached for me, his hands shaking. "Sarah, I'm so sorry. I should have seen it. I should have protected you." I hugged him, feeling years of tension finally start to release. "We'll talk about everything later," I said. "Right now, I have a wedding to get ready for." James pulled me close, examining my cut. "Are you sure you still want to do this today? We can postpone." I shook my head, smiling despite the throbbing pain. "No way. I'm not letting her win." Besides, I checked my phone, where alerts were coming in from James's colleagues at the fraud department. The financial team just seized all her accounts. She's watching her entire world collapse on what was supposed to be her big escape day. I can't think of a better wedding gift. As I got ready in my real wedding dress, the one Karen never knew about, I could hear police and forensic accountants downstairs, going through years of financial records. Karen's perfectly crafted facade was crumbling, and with it, all her power. The wedding would go on, but first, I had a statement to give to the police. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't just about exposing the truth, it's about making sure justice is served in broad daylight, with plenty of witnesses. The hours after Karen's arrest were a whirlwind. Sitting in the hospital while a nurse cleaned my cut, I watched my phone light up with messages from the forensic team. What we'd uncovered was bigger than anyone expected. "You're not going to believe this," James said, rushing into the room with his laptop. "Karen wasn't just stealing from your dad's practice. She's been running this same scam at 3 other dental offices in the state." The nurse paused her work, clearly interested in the unfolding drama. I didn't mind. By the end of the day, everyone would know anyway. "How did she manage that?" I asked, wincing as the nurse applied antiseptic. "She used different names, different identities, but she always followed the same pattern: get hired as an office manager, gain trust, then slowly drain the accounts." James pulled up documents showing various IDs, all with Karen's face but different names. "Your dad's practice was just her biggest score yet." Detective Rodriguez, James's supervisor, joined us with more news. "We've frozen all known accounts," she said, "but we're finding new ones every hour. This woman's been busy for the past decade." My phone buzzed with a text from Dad. "The police found something in her study. Please come home when you can." Back at the house, everything had changed. Police tape crossed the study door, and forensic accountants had taken over the dining room. Dad sat at the kitchen table, looking like he'd aged 10 years in a few hours. "Look at this," he said, sliding a folder across the table. Inside were letters, dozens of them, from other families. Karen had been blackmailing them, threatening to expose personal information she'd stolen from patient files. She wasn't just stealing money, I realized, reading through the letters. She was destroying lives. That's when our personal revenge plan expanded into something bigger. James and Detective Rodriguez set up a command center in our living room. Our wedding venue became an impromptu investigation headquarters. "We need statements from everyone she's hurt," Detective Rodriguez explained. "Every victim, every witness. The more evidence we gather, the stronger our case becomes." Dad threw himself into helping, perhaps trying to make up for years of turning a blind eye. He contacted other dentists in the area, warning them to check their accounts. The responses were shocking. Karen had interviewed at several other practices, likely planning her next targets. My phone kept buzzing with messages from wedding guests arriving in town. Instead of canceling, we decided to turn the situation to our advantage. Many of our guests work in law, finance, or healthcare, James pointed out. Why not use their expertise? So our wedding planning became a different kind of planning. The rehearsal dinner turned into a strategy session. James's uncle, the judge, advised on legal proceedings. His aunt, the forensic accountant, coordinated with the investigation team. Even my mother's relatives, whom Karen had tried so hard to exclude, proved invaluable. My cousin Tracy, a cybersecurity expert, helped track Karen's digital footprint. Uncle Mike, a retired detective, shared insights from similar cases he'd worked on. "You know what the best part is?" James said as we reviewed evidence late into the night. "She thinks this is just about your dad's practice. She has no idea we've uncovered her entire operation." The investigation revealed Karen's entire history: previous marriages, name changes, victims across 3 states. Each discovery strengthened our case and validated every instinct I'd had about her over the years. Dad found me in my old room that night, sorting through years of documented incidents that now served as evidence. I failed you, he said quietly. I was so afraid of being alone after your mother died that I let this woman hurt you. I don't expect you to forgive me. I hugged him, cutting off his words. Dad, you're helping make it right now. That's what matters. As I lay in bed that night, surrounded by case files instead of wedding details, I felt strangely at peace. Tomorrow would change everything, not just for me and Dad, but for every family Karen had ever hurt. The revenge I'd planned had grown into something much bigger than personal justice. It had become a chance to stop Karen from ever hurting another family again. And the best part? She still had no idea what was coming. The courthouse was packed for Karen's arraignment. News of her arrest had spread through the local medical community like wildfire, and victims from other practices showed up to watch her face justice. I sat in the front row with Dad and James, watching Karen's perfectly crafted world crumble. Gone were her designer clothes and superior smirk. In her orange jumpsuit, with her makeup-free face, she looked smaller somehow. But when she spotted me, that familiar hatred flashed in her eyes. The prosecution calls Sarah Mitchell to the stand. Walking to the witness box, I felt 15 years of fear and anger melt into determination. Karen's lawyer, a slick-looking man in an expensive suit, seemed confident. He didn't know what was coming. Miss Mitchell, he began, isn't it true that you've had a difficult relationship with my client due to your resentment of her marriage to your father? I smiled slightly. I'd love to talk about that marriage. Specifically about how it wasn't legally valid. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Karen's face went pale. What do you mean, the judge asked? I pulled out a document James and I had discovered. Karen Morgan, or should I say Karen Williams Peterson Morgan Blake, was still legally married to 2 other men when she married my father. She's been running the same scam for years, marry wealthy professionals, gain control of their finances, then disappear with everything she can steal. The evidence unfolded like a well-choreographed dance. Financial records showed millions stolen from multiple practices. Former employees testified about mysterious discrepancies Karen had explained away. Other victims came forward with stories matching mine exactly. But the real bombshell came from an unexpected source. A woman named Linda Baker approached me during a court recess. I was Karen's assistant at her first dental office scam, Linda explained. I've been tracking her for years, gathering evidence, waiting for someone to finally catch her. When I saw the news about your case, I knew it was time. Linda's testimony was devastating. She had documentation of Karen's earliest schemes, including evidence of her first victim, a retired dentist who'd lost everything and died believing it was his financial mismanagement that ruined him. Karen's lawyer asked for a recess to confer with his client. Through the courtroom windows, we could see him gesturing angrily. Later, we learned she'd lied to him too, paying his retainer with stolen money. When court resumed, Karen's mask finally cracked completely. You think you're so smart, she screamed at me across the courtroom. You're nothing. I took everything from you and your pathetic father because you deserved it. All of you deserved it. Her outburst saved us weeks of trial time. With her public confession and the mountain of evidence, Karen's fate was sealed. The judge's sentence was everything we'd hoped for: 15 years in prison, full restitution to all victims, and a permanent ban from working in medical office administration. But the best moment came when the FBI agent stepped forward. Karen Morgan, you're also under arrest for federal charges of identity theft, interstate wire fraud, and tax evasion. Karen's face turned gray as she realized her state charges were just the beginning. The local scams we'd uncovered had led the FBI to a much larger investigation. As they led her away, she looked back at me one last time. Gone was the powerful, controlling woman who had terrorized my life. In her place was just a common criminal facing the consequences of her actions. Outside the courthouse, other victims came up to thank me. Many were crying, finally seeing justice for their losses. Dad hugged me tight, whispering, "Your mother would be so proud of you." James squeezed my hand, ready to finally have that wedding. I looked around at all the people who had helped make this day possible: the investigators, the victims turned witnesses, my unlikely army of wedding guests turned legal advisors. Yes, I said. But first, I think we need to add a few more people to the guest list. The revenge I'd dreamed of for years had become something much more meaningful, a chance for healing, not just for me, but for everyone Karen had hurt along the way. Sometimes the best revenge isn't just about making someone pay for what they've done. Sometimes it's about bringing people together to make sure it never happens to anyone else. The weeks following Karen's arrest were a whirlwind of revelations. Every day brought discoveries about her crimes and their ripple effects through the community. Dad's practice wasn't just missing money; patient records had been compromised, insurance claims falsified, and lives had been affected in ways we were only beginning to understand. "I can't believe I let this happen," Dad said one evening as we sorted through years of tampered records. He looked exhausted but determined. These people trusted me with their care, and she used that trust to steal from them. But something unexpected happened. Instead of turning against Dad, the community rallied around him. Other dentists offered to help review files. Former patients came forward not with anger, but with support. "It wasn't your fault," Dr. Mitchell, one elderly patient, told him. "She fooled all of us. What matters is making it right." The FBI investigation revealed even more shocking details. Karen hadn't worked alone, she was part of a larger network targeting medical practices across the country. Her arrest led to the exposure of similar schemes in 12 other states. My phone wouldn't stop ringing with calls from reporters wanting to cover the story. "Local woman exposes multi-state medical fraud ring" became headline news. But the real story wasn't about me, it was about all the people working together to rebuild what Karen had destroyed. James's aunt helped Dad restructure his practice's finances. His uncle, the judge, connected us with advocacy groups for fraud victims. My mom's relatives, whom Karen had tried so hard to exclude from our lives, became our strongest support system. "Your mother always said community was the best medicine," my Uncle Mike reminded me. Looks like she was right. The hardest part was watching Dad face his role in everything. One night, I found him in his study, looking at old photos of Mom. "She would have seen through Karen immediately," he said quietly. "She always could spot a fake." Mom also believed in second chances, I reminded him. That's why she became a nurse, to help people heal. Karen's other victims started reaching out to each other, forming a support network. Weekly meetings began in our living room, with people sharing stories and helping each other recover, both financially and emotionally. Linda Baker, Karen's former assistant who had testified against her, became a key figure in helping other practices protect themselves from similar scams. She started conducting workshops on financial security for medical offices. "Your case gave us all courage," she told me. "Sometimes it just takes one person standing up to break the silence." The FBI's investigation led them to Karen's hidden accounts overseas. The money she had stolen over the years was gradually recovered and returned to her victims. It wouldn't erase the pain she'd caused, but it gave people a chance to rebuild their lives. Even Karen's other ex-husbands came forward, each with similar stories of manipulation and theft. One of them, a retired doctor from Florida, flew in specifically to thank us for stopping her. "I lost my practice, my home, my reputation," he said. "I thought I'd never get any of it back. But watching her finally face justice, that's worth more than any amount of money." Dad threw himself into making amends. He offered free dental care to anyone who had been financially impacted by Karen's schemes. He spoke at dental conferences about recognizing signs of fraud. Slowly, he began to forgive himself. The wedding insurance company called about our claim for the ruined dress and venue deposits. When they heard our story, they not only covered everything but offered to sponsor a fraud awareness program for wedding vendors. As for Karen, her world had completely unraveled. Her fancy friends abandoned her. Her expensive possessions were seized. The carefully constructed image she'd maintained for years shattered completely. But perhaps the most satisfying consequence wasn't about karma or justice, it was about healing. Every person Karen had hurt was now connected, supporting each other, and making sure no one else would suffer the same fate. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about watching someone fall. Sometimes it's about helping everyone else rise. 3 months after Karen's arrest, I finally had my wedding day, and it was nothing like the one she had tried to ruin. Instead of the backyard ceremony she'd forced on us, we held it in the garden of the local community center, the same place where our victim support group now met weekly. The guest list had grown considerably. Besides our original guests, we invited everyone who had helped bring Karen to justice, the investigators, the other victims, and even Linda Baker, who had become a close friend. What started as a plan for revenge had created a family bigger than I could have imagined. Dad walked me down the aisle, both of us stopping at Mom's photo in the front row. "She's here with us," he whispered, squeezing my hand. "She's been guiding you all along." James waited at the altar, looking handsome in his suit, but what made me tear up wasn't how he looked, it was the sight of all the people behind him. Every seat was filled with someone who had become part of our story, part of our healing. Detective Rodriguez sat with her family, her daughter holding a basket of flowers. James's aunt and uncle, who had helped build our case, beamed proudly. The dental assistants from Dad's practice, who had helped reconstruct years of tampered records, dabbed at their eyes. Even my high school guidance counselor was there, the one who had helped me apply to colleges in secret, keeping my acceptance letters safe from Karen's prying eyes. During the reception, Dad stood to give his speech. His hands shook slightly as he held the microphone. 15 years ago, I made a terrible mistake," he began. "I let fear and loneliness blind me to what was happening to my daughter. But Sarah didn't just save herself, she saved me, and countless others. She showed me what real strength looks like." He turned to me, tears in his eyes. "Your mother would be so proud of the woman you've become. Not because you exposed the truth or brought someone to justice, but because you did it while helping others heal." The support group we'd started continued to grow. What began as a way to help Karen's victims had evolved into a network that helped anyone affected by financial fraud. Dad's practice became a model for other medical offices in preventing similar schemes. James and I moved into our place, but we stayed close to Dad. He was different now, stronger, more present, more like the father I remembered from before Mom died. Every Sunday, he joined us for dinner, often bringing someone new from the support group who needed a family. A year after the wedding, I received a letter from the State Board of Professional Licensing. They wanted me to speak at their annual conference about recognizing signs of financial abuse in medical practices. My story had already helped change policies in 3 states. You know what the best revenge turned out to be, I told James as we prepared for the conference. It's not that Karen lost everything, it's that her actions ended up helping people protect themselves. James smiled, pulling me close. Your mom would say that's not revenge at all, that's justice. He was right. What started as a quest for revenge had become something much more meaningful. Karen had spent years trying to tear people apart, but in the end, she had accidentally brought us all together. The last I heard, Karen was still in federal prison, facing additional charges as more of her crimes came to light. But I rarely thought about her anymore. I was too busy living my life, helping others, and building the kind of family she could never destroy. Sometimes people ask if I regret not exposing her sooner. I tell them that timing is everything. If I had acted earlier, we might have stopped her at Dad's practice, but we wouldn't have uncovered her entire network. We wouldn't have been able to help all the other victims. Sometimes you have to wait for the right moment to let justice unfold in the biggest way possible. Mom used to say that true strength isn't about fighting back, it's about lifting others. Looking around at our extended family of survivors, supporters, and friends, I finally understood what she meant. The best revenge isn't about making someone pay for their crimes. It's about turning their crimes into a force for good, creating something beautiful from something ugly, and helping others find their strength along the way. That's not just revenge, that's redemption.